Good evening, this is Rabbi Chaim, the Rosh Yeshiva, the WebYeshiva, and we're going to try to learn a little bit about the parsha this week. This shiur for Parshat Mטות-מסעי, Tavshin Pem Hey, is dedicated L'ilui Nishmat Rab Chaim Yosef ben Chanoch Alevi, Sheniftar b'Kavchet b'Tammuz. He died on the 28th day of Tammuz, in memory of Yosef Gutman Zal, a Holocaust survivor by Shifra and Tzvi Tafet. We're coming to the end of the book of Bamidbar, and we've spoken several times about the book. And we know that the parsha that precedes Tisha B'Av, the parasha that precedes the exact day of Tisha B'Av, is the parasha of Dvarim. And so this week, when we finish the book of Bamidbar, we learn two parshiot, Matot and Mas'ei. What we're going to learn together is the beginning of the parasha of Mas'ei, the second of the two parshiot that we read on this upcoming Shabbat. So the first part of the pasuk says, Eila Mas'ei b'nei Yisrael. Eila sort of usually these are the ones. It kind of indicates a response to something. Eila, these are them. What you asked for. What did somebody ask for? Mas'ei b'nei Yisrael, the travels of b'nei Yisrael, the travels. Why were they traveling? Because they were being punished. Why were they being punished? Because they refused or they accepted the words of the spies who denigrated Eretz Canaan and decided not to follow Moshe Rabbeinu and go immediately to Eretz Canaan. They were punished by 40 years of sojourning in the desert. Asher yatzu me'eretz Mitzrayim, letziv otam biyad Moshe ve'Aaron. They left Mitzrayim, and here Moshe and Aaron are given equal billing. Moshe ve'Aaron. You see that? Biyad Moshe ve'Aaron. Let's read the other psukim, and then we'll go look at the Rashi. Vayichtov Moshe, and here it says something that's a little difficult to understand. It says Vayichtov Moshe. Now we know that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote down the Torah in its entirety, which is stated clearly at the end of the book of Dvarim, and then gave it out to the various tribes. But here we're in the book of Bamidbar. We're not finished with the Torah. So what it says, Vayichtov Moshe et motza'ehem lemaseihem, the places they left and the places they went to. Al pi Hashem, quite amazing. Al pi Hashem, I mean, everything in the Torah is written Al pi Hashem, but not everything is claimed to be Al pi Hashem. This list of travels from one place to another, a list of travels that reflected a punishment on the part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu punishing Bnei Yisrael, that is Al pi Hashem. Now, what does that mean? What's so special about it? Ve'ele maseihem lemotza'ehem. And here they are. And it starts, Pasuk Gimel Vayisu miRamses, a city in Egypt, B'chodesh HaRishon, L'chamisha Asayom L'chodesh HaRishon. They went on the 5th day of the first month, which is Nisan, Mimocharat HaPesach. But the day after they gave the Korban Pesach, Yatzu B'nei Yisrael B'yad Ramah, B'nei Yisrael left Mitzrayim with an extended hand indicating power and authority, B'yad Ramah, Le'enei kol Mitzrayim. Everybody in Mitzrayim knew what had happened. And then the pasuk starts the list. Mitzrayim mikabrim. Just at Asher hika Hashem b'hem kol b'chor. This is what happened to the Mitzrayim, and then the list begins in pasuk Hey. You see pasuk Hey, Vayisu b'nei Yisrael miram says. Vayisu b'nei Yisrael miram says. Vayisu b'nei Yisrael miram says. V'yachanu b'Sukkot. Vayisu misukot v'yachanu b'eitam. I mean, it's mamish a list of all the places that Bnei Yisrael went to during the 40 years of their sojourn in the desert. And we see that Moshe Rabbeinu was directed to write this down, and it was considered to be Al Pi Hashem. Now, all the Torah is Al Pi Hashem, but it usually doesn't say that specifically. So this is a kind of a mystery, like you look at something and you say, do you need it? Not really. I mean, you might have in school had a teacher who taught you this parak of Chumash and was kind of very annoying and tried to find the places and their names on a map. And I mean, that actually, I found that always a little bit distressing. I mean, what good would it do me to know where in Sinai all these places were that Bnei Yisrael traveled in? So the Mefoshim take up this problem, the problem of having irrelevancy in the Torah, which is a problem that comes up from time to time, but the focus of that question in the parsha of Mas'ei is remarkable. It's remarkable. Therefore, we're going to take it seriously and try to understand what it is that is happening. So first we'll learn the Rashi. First we will learn the Rashi. Eile Masei. Rashi doesn't kid around and he says, Lama nichtabu hamasaot halalu. Why are these trips emphasized? Why are they written down? The place of where the traveling began and the place to which they came, and the names are named all the time. Lo dia chasadav shel makom, in order that we should be aware of God's chesed, loving kindness. Oh, aware of God's chesed. I mean, we were aware of God's chesed on many occasions, especially after the Chet HaEgel, after they built the golden calf. V'hodia chasadav shel makom, she'af al pi shegazar aleihem letaltelam u'lahaniyam b'midbar. Even though God decided letaltelam, to make them shake back and forth, and lahaniyam, to bring them against their will, so as in the desert. Lo tomar shaya na'im u'metulaim mimasa lemasa. Don't think that they had difficulty going from one trip to the second trip, and this was going on all the time. Ela arba'im v'shtayim, but this is what really happened. There were arba'im v'shtayim masaot. There were 40 masaot. 40 masaot means 40 trips. Tzei mihem subtract Yudalet 14, Shekulam Hayu B'Shana Rishona, the first 14 trips that Bnei Yisrael took were B'Shana Rishona. Kodem Gzeira, before they built the golden calf and before they were being punished by these trips. So the first 14 trips that they took didn't count. They didn't count at all. Same Hem Yudalet, Shekulam Hayu B'Shana Rishona. All these 14 were in the first year. Kodem Gzeira, before the punishment was invoked, before they built the golden calf. Misha Nas'u Miram Seis, Ad Sheba'u L'Ritma. From the time they left Ramses in Egypt till they came to Ritma, Shemisham Nishtalchu Hamaraglim. That's where the spies were sent to spy out the land. Shene'emar, and he quotes a pasuk in the Balotcha, Va'achar nas'u ha'am mechatzerot v'gomer. He shows you that from the time that after Matan Torah and after the punishment of the tribes, that's when they started paying the price and they traveled. Right? They traveled from Chatzerot. Shalach lecha anashim, that's what Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu about the spies. Shalach lecha anashim. V'kan hu omer, v'yis'u mechatzerot. And here he says they traveled from Chatzerot. V'yis'u lechem anashim, that's your free will. But here, v'yis'u mechatzerot, that's what they had to do. V'yechanu Beritma, Lamadeta, Shaya b'midbar Paran, Shahi b'midbar Paran, that they're still in the desert of Paran. Va'od, Otsei Misham Shmone Masod, then you could also subtract another 8 trips that they took, Shayu la'achar mitat Aaron, which took place after Aaron died. Achar mitat Aaron. Mehar hahar, behar hahar, that's where he died. Ad Arbot Moab, Bishadat Arbaim, until they got to Arbot Moab. Arbot Moab became the jumping off point for entering Eretz Israel. But at that time, they were being led by Yoshua ben Nun because Moshe Rabbeinu had already died. So you have to remove from the Cheshbon those Shmone Masaot that took place after the death of Aaron, because they weren't included really in the punishment. Ad Arbot Moab. Arbot Moab is the place that Moshe Rabbeinu recited the book of Devarim to Bnei Yisrael, and where he died at the end of that recitation. And then Yoshua ben Nun led them to Eretz Yisrael. Nimtza, Rashi. Here Rashi is teaching us how to add and subtract. He says you take off 14 and then you take off another 8. It says Nimtza, Shekol Shmona Sholshim Shana, all the 38 years in the desert. Lo Nasu Ela Esrim Masaot. They only went on 20 trips. And Rashi ends by saying, Zem Yisodo, Sherabi Moshe Hadarshan, one of the famous commentaries that had Rashi's ear. Rashi who liked to quote Rabbi Moshe Hadarshan. So what's the argument? What's the argument that Rashi makes? Rashi says that the Torah wanted us to know that the punishment was carried out as an act of chesed. It's an act of chesed. It was what the Torah is teaching us, is the importance of chesed in our own lives. And then even if we feel that bad things are happening, or that we're not being able we're not able to take control of the situation that we're in, which was what Bnei Yisrael found themselves in. They were in a situation that they could not change. The punishment was decreed from heaven, and there was nothing they could do about it except move around for 40 years aimlessly, with no purpose, no particular purpose except to pass the time. Think how terrible that is. The nation that was committed to changing the world, to making things different than they had been, not for making another Egypt in the world, but making something that had never been made in the past. And so they were aimless. They were without purpose. They were so the Torah says to Moshe Rabbeinu, write down every place they went to, every stop they made, every departure that they departed. Write it all down. And it took Rashi to teach us Alpi, with the help of Rabbi Moshe Darshan, because Rashi said, well, look at it carefully. You'll see that even though HaKadosh Baruch Hu said 40, it was really only 20. So that 20 and 40 years gives you time in different places to establish a community, to learn the Torah, to be able to accept Moshe Rabbeinu's leadership. And all of these things amount to the idea that chesed is applicable to all situations. Everything is chesed is something that you always ask for, and it's always appropriate to give. And everybody apparently has the capacity to give chesed, to make chesed, to do chesed, and that's what we learn from this pasuk. So this is what Rashi says. So what do you think of Rashi? I mean, Rashi doesn't allow the text to get away with it. Doesn't allow the text to say, okay, why not? It could be. Not Rashi says, no, there's got to be a purpose. And the purpose is in the hidden meaning, and the hidden meaning is in arithmetic. You just subtract what you're supposed to subtract. You come up with the real number of punishment trips that were made by Bnei Yisrael in the desert. And that gives you a different vision entirely of what happened. But Rashi is only the start. Rashi is only the start. We have to look now at the Ramban. Ramban says, first he quotes Rashi, Acharei Nikmat Midyan, after they did battle with the Midianites. Shamar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu leMoshe, Achar Sefer Lamecha, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Moshe Rabbeinu, when you finish with this business of Midian, then you will die. Right? V'acharei shechalak ha'masa'ot ha'eretz Sichon ba'od, u'banu ha'arim ha'nizkarot, after they built the cities, and the Torah says these are a reference to the Psukim at the end of the last parsha. Natan da'ato lichtov et ha'masa'ot. Natan da'ato. You see, no good. Okay, Natan da'ato lichtov ha'masa'ot. He set his mind to this problem of writing down the trips. It was like Moshe Rabbeinu knew that he had to do it. V'nitkavein lazeh l'odiach hasedav, and the purpose was to teach us the chesed shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu imahem, with the people of Israel. She'af al pi shegazar aleihem l'taltalam. גזר עליהם לתלמלם ולהניעם במדבר, לא תחשוב שהיו נעים ומטולטלים ממקום למקום. They weren't They didn't suffer that much from being shaken around and, okay, let's go. We got here, let's go there. Like, it sometimes happens to people in the army. That, you imagine that the people who are telling you to move don't know where it is you're supposed to move to. But this was not, it wasn't, the idea of writing down the names was not to say that there were bad things happening in all of these places, but to say it wasn't so terrible. Tamid, v'lo hayta lahem menucha, אבל בכל הזמן הגדול, לא הלכו אלא 42 מסעות. During the 40 years, they only took 40 trips, 42 trips. כמו שכתב הרב רש"י מדברי Rabbi Moshe Darshan. Okay. So he quotes Rashi. Quotes Rashi, maybe adds a word here, adds a word there, but obviously the Ramban is in favor of Rashi. He thought Rashi, Al Pi Bar Moshe Darshan, he doesn't say, I disagree, I have something to say. He quotes Rashi. Let's assume he did it for people who didn't have Rashi handy. So he says, here's Rashi. Rashi will explain the difficulty in this matter. Rashi will explain the difficulty. And then he says something that is very important. Hosif harav b'moreh nebuchim. Who's harav b'moreh nebuchim? That's the Rambam. So the Ramban, who is not always a big fan of what the Rambam said. Well, I would say maybe I should restate it. The Ramban was a big fan of the Rambam, but he didn't always agree with him. And when he didn't agree with him, when he didn't agree with the Rambam, he made it clear. He didn't hedge his bets or the Rambam's bets. He made it quite clear. If he didn't agree, he would disagree. He would disagree quite strongly, emphatically, sometimes. He says, that's Moshe Rabbeinu. He says, Hosif harav b'moreh nebuchim, the Rambam. And then in the parentheses, it says Gimel Nun, which means part 3 of the Moreh Nebuchim, the chapter 50. Chapter 50. To'elet hanisim v'ha'otot ha'na'asot. It's for the good of the miracles and the signs that were done. Hayu amitiyot l'chol ro'ehem. They certainly happened, these miracles. The Rambam had to understand, the Torah says there was a miracle. There's a Kriyat Yam Suf. The Torah says, Dam Svadeya Kinei Marov, right? That's what the Torah says. So he says when it comes to the Rambam says, Laskir HaMasa, Osif HaRab B'moreh Nebuchim, To'elet b'yidiatam. To'elet b'yidiatam. There's a purpose for our knowing about these places. There's a to'elet. There's a purpose. There's something we get out of it. What do we get out of it? Lomar hatzorech lazkir hamasa'im gadol me'od. He says there's a real need. There's a real need to mention these masa'im. A real need. Gadol ma'od ki hanisim v'ha'otot ha'na'asot hayu amitiyot l'kol ro'ehem. He says the people who lived the miracles, the people who were there when the miracles took place in the desert. What miracles? Well, they ate the man every day. They took twice as much on Friday, and they ate it on Friday and on Shabbat. And the man was a miracle. And there was the water from Miriam's well. That was a miracle. They lived in these miracles. So he says, the Rambam said, Lamar, Hatzorech lahazkir hamasaim gadol ma'od. There's a very big reason that we are taking the time to mention these masaim. Ki hanisim v'haotot, that we call miracles and signs, hana'asot, hayu amitiyot l'kol ru'ayim. The people who were there, they certainly believed in the miracles. They were happening. They ate the man. They drank the water. I mean, of course they knew that they were living in a world of miracles. Ach ba'atid yud dvarim b'shmu'ah. He says, but later on, the children of the people who were there, they hear the story, but they didn't see it. They didn't see the miracles. They didn't live with them. He says, you see the word atid? That word atid in the future. Yiyu divarim bishmu'ah. It'll be an oral rendition. The father tells the son, and then the son becomes a father and tells his son, until he said, yeah, we know it happened. We know we did Pesach, we told them miracles, but we're not like you. You were there. We weren't there. V'yachzivam, and they will sort of like turn away from them, think that they're not true. Achzivam hashomea, the person who hears the story won't really take them seriously. Umeotot haTorah v'niflaoteha ha'atzum amidat Yisrael b'midbar 40 shana u'mitziat haman b'kol yom v'hein mekomot rechokot min ha'yishuv ואינן טבעיות לבני האדם. לבני אדם בהן מקומות רחוקים. So when you tell the story, שנראה ומציאות המן בכל יום. Let me go back a little. Another line, אותה התורה ונפלאותיה העצומות עמידת ישראל במדבר. אוקיי, ישראל במדבר 40 שנה ומציאת המן בכל יום, ואין מקומות רחוקות מן היישובי. All these things took place in the desert, and the desert is very far away from habitable land. You can't live there. You can't live in the desert. That's why it's a desert. There's no, it's not natural for people to live in that place. Lo makom zera. That's real. That's a place you can live in, where things grow, and you eat the things that grow. V'amru haTorah, v'amra haTorah, lechem lo achaltem, v'yayin b'shekar lo shatitem. You didn't have to eat bread. You didn't have to drink wine. V'kol eile otot hem במעשה נס נראות לעין. וכאשר ידע הבורא יתברך, when God knows, כי יעבור על אלה האותות, מה שיעבור על שני הימים, לא יאמינו השומעים בהם, ויחשבו כי עמידתם במדבר הזה היה קרוב מן היישוב, מקום אשר בני אדם שם. So if Bnei Yisrael, this was the Ramban, quoting the Rambam. The Rambam says this. The Rambam says, we have to tell a story. You have to tell a story to your children. So you say, it was miraculous. 40 years we wandered around in the desert. Nothing grew there. There was nothing to eat there. There was nobody there. And when we managed because we had the man, because we had the bear of Miriam. All of this is the way this is how we lived. So the children who hear the story, they say, well, maybe they were confused. Maybe who was confused? Maybe the people who were there at the time in the desert, maybe they were confused. And they weren't really so far away from, the deserts, they come to an end. And when the desert comes to an end, there are people who live in towns and in villages nearby, because the end of the desert is the beginning of agriculture. It's the place where you could eat from. You get the fruit that grows. So the children who are listening to the stories, you say, well, maybe it wasn't that way. Maybe you didn't really. You were in the desert. Yeah, you were in the desert, but you were pretty close to regular a civilized place. So you could go to the supermarket and buy stuff, and you think it's man. And therefore, it was important to include in the story, this is what the Rambam says, it was important to include in the story the names of the places from which they left and where they came to, because that, you could take an atlas and check. You see, you know where it is. Is it close to civilized land, or is it part of the desert? So if you see it, it's part of the desert, it strengthens your ability to tell the story. That's what the Rambam Yesham. Asabim utzmachim lema'achal b'nei Adam v'sheyeh b'makom hahem borot mayim al ken yirchik milibot b'nei Adam hamachshavot ha'ela. That's what the Torah wants to do. It wants to deny you the opportunity to make in your mind the thinking that this was all regular. There was nothing miraculous that took place in the desert. They just wandered around for 40 years. And the fact that they were not close to real life was not something that was part of the punishment, because they could always go to the supermarket and buy whatever they needed. So the Rambam concludes it was absolutely vital to write down the names of the places that they left from and they went to, because when you looked in your atlas or you look at your collection of maps that you have for that part of the world, you would see that all of these places are really in the desert, and they are not part of the supermarket chain that you usually go to. And so when you hear the story, when you receive the story, you will understand that the story is dependent to a certain extent on knowing where the places that you went to are. So even though, for the Ramban, I would say the amazing thing about the Ramban is that Rashi is right and the Rambam is right. Because the Ramban presents it like fait accompli. They did it. Rashi and the Rambam did it, even though Rashi and the Rambam are saying different things. But you could say different things about the same kind of problem. The problem was, why do we have to know the names of the places that the people went to in the desert? Question. So the Rashi answers, well, you have to look. Chesed is not something that you command. Chesed is something that you learn from example. Right? It's not the Shulchan Aruch that says do chesed. It's experience that makes you do chesed. And so in embodied in the list of 42 places. This chesed, that's Rashi. And the Ramban is not embarrassed. He quotes Rashi straight away. He says, that's good. And then the Ramban says, and then there's the Rambam who added something, added an idea that telling the story demands factual evidence. Not because anybody's against the story, but what happens is that things kind of dissipate over time. You forget about it. You forget about the grandeur of it. You tell the story over and over again, and it sounds the same. And every time it sounds a little bit less impressive. So if the children heard that there were 42 Masa'ot, and the Masa'ot were punishment for what happened with the Merablim, with the spies. So you would tell the story about the miraculous existence of the Masa'ot from Yetziat Mitzrayim until they got to Arvot Moab. But the story had to be told in a way that would be most believable. And the most believable story is the one that has good factual underpinning. And the facts are what make the story according to the Rambam. Otherwise, it dissipates over time. You forget about it. You lose your connection to the story. And so the Ramban said, and the Moreh Nevuchim, and the Rambam and the Moreh Nevuchim said, a great insight for the Ramban. I mean, who was a man of great insight. And he said, this is what we have to know the names of the places in order to validate the story. The story is a story about Nisim and Niflaot. And if we accurately are able to describe the places that they left from and went to, that'll strengthen our vision of the story as being absolutely accurate. Have a good Shabbos.
Bye, Rabbi. Have a good Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. You too.
Shabbat Shalom.